Great to be here. Good to have all of you here with us, and those of you with our online presence, we're so glad that you're here today. I'm excited. I'm starting a new message series. He's Still Got the Whole World in His Hands is the title, and of course it comes from the old spiritual, really old song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. Now, I'm not promising I won't be singing this at some point during the series, but you can relax. I'm not going to sing it today. I know it's an old campfire song, but it's a reminder that when times are tough, God is there. And so the message today is, the series today is He's still got the whole world in His hands. We live in times that are very troubling, and sometimes you think, what's God doing? Where is God? What's happening? And then we're reminded that there have been hard times all throughout history. And so the title today of the first message is Nothing New. And that's because there really is nothing new in the world. And so I want to start by reading some of my verses from my favorite book of the Bible, Ecclesiastes, which reminds us, it says, history merely repeats itself. See, we forget that sometimes because we're just in our little slice right here. It says, it has all been done before. Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, here is something new. But actually, it is old. I love that. Hey, you see this latest new thing? Yeah, that's been done before. It says, nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past. And in future generations, no one will remember what we're doing now. And so we don't remember what they did, and they're not going to remember what happened to us. And so some of us, though, have been experiencing something new to us. It's not really new in the world. And that is this pandemic. In our lifetime, and even in my parents' lifetime, they never experienced anything like this. But that doesn't mean it's new. We have lots of stress and anxiety, about this COVID thing. I'm someone who really tries to keep up on what's going on in the world. I'm just, the United States, our numbers are okay. Lots of people are getting vaccinated. It's very exciting. But there are parts of the world where they don't have the vaccine very much yet, like India is. They're on track to have more than 2 million new cases a week. They're having 2,000 to 3,000 deaths a day. Brazil, it's just terrible. And so, we're thinking, oh man, we're finally coming out of this. But as far as the world is concerned, this thing's still going on. We're wondering about kids in school. Can they be in school? Should they? When will they be? How do we keep them there? There's economic troubles. There's all these divisions. Political divisions, racial divisions. There's all these anger and shootings and things, and we live in a world that's so troubled. And I think a lot of these things are related. And none of us have ever experienced anything like we're currently experiencing. And so it isn't anything new. It's just new for us. There were times several hundred years ago when a third of the world's population died from plagues. And this isn't that bad, but it's bad, right? And so like Ecclesiastes tells us, we didn't remember, memory fades quickly. So the next generations, they're not even going to remember what we went through here. But our generation, we forgot about it, and so that's what's really going to happen. But just because others have had similar problems in the past, that doesn't mean these aren't still legitimate hard times we're going through. In fact, we're living in some, I believe, very difficult, troubled times. And when this whole started, I thought, man, this is so hard to shut down. How do we do this? And it's just really hard to stay shut down and deal with it. I think the hardest thing is going to be restarting. I think we're all going to be confused about how it works. I think it's going to take us a while. But the times we're living in are incredibly troubled. And what happens during these times is sometimes our faith is challenged. Sometimes we struggle to trust that God is really still has everything in his hands. And so I want to start today, before I get to kind of the main part, I want to share just some biblical examples of troubled times in the past, just to let you know. This is not anything new. But it's bad times of coming on. So point number one, troubled times in the Bible. And I want to start with the story of Joseph and his brothers. And this isn't Joseph and Mary. This is Joseph, son of Jacob, back in the book of Genesis. And he was a guy who had some pretty serious problems with his siblings. And maybe you've had some sibling rivalries too, like maybe your sister borrowed your blouse and didn't ask you or didn't launder it, or maybe you've had some sibling troubles with inheritances. Well, Joseph was pretty bad. At one point in his life, he's down in a well. His brothers have just put him there, and he's sitting down there. He's listening to his brothers talk, and they're saying, well, should we sell him or should we kill him? And some of the brothers are like, let's sell him. Let's sell him. That way we get some money, his blood's on our hands. And others are like, let's kill him. Like, I can't imagine that kind of trouble. Now, the real great thing about that was God was right there in the middle of that. He was using that terrible time. Joseph probably didn't see it at the time, but this set up Joseph to bring food to the world when there was a huge famine, and to save his whole family. But it was troubled times. The next one I want to share about is King David and his son Absalom. Now, just a note, for those of you that are thinking of coming to my Wednesday night Bible study, which starts not this week, but next week, this is going to be one of the things we're going to be studying down the road. And so, King David, he was the second king of Israel. The first one kind of washed out, and so God raised up David. And one of the promises God made to David was that somebody from your line, from the line of David, is going to rule forever. And at one point, David is awakened in the morning to discover that his son, Absalom, has raised up an army, and he's about to invade the capital city to conquer it and replace his father David as king. And yet, God was right in the middle of all that mess. David trusted the Lord. He worked through it. It was a very messy thing. So if you want to know more details, come out to the Bible study. It's going to be great, starting May 5th. And then the last one I want to share, there's so many I could have shared about, the time of Moses when he was born. The king of Egypt thought there were too many of those Israelites, and so he said, "No, we're going to kill all the baby boys. We're going to do some population control." Terrible, terrible times. But I'm going to skip ahead. This is going to be my main story for the day. It was Jesus at the Last Supper, and the Last Supper, we call it because it was Jesus' last meal with his disciples. And sometimes it's referred to as the upper room because that was the place where they met, some upper room. But this was a remembrance time for the Jewish people. They were going to sit there. All good Jewish people would have a meal together at this time and remember what happened hundreds of years earlier, what God had done. And they were remembering the morning when they were finally free from Egypt. Their enslavement was over. This is sort of, Joseph went there and met, reunited with his family. He was a big man, but what happened was they started out as a family and a tribe, and they grew into a small nation. A new king who forgot history, didn't know who Joseph was, and just saw these people there's too many of them, and so I'm going to enslave them. And so the remembrances, they remembered when they were finally set free. And but before they were set free, they were there for over 400 years, enslaved in Egypt. And for 400 years, people prayed for deliverance to God. And can you imagine that 400 years? So let's say you're somewhere around year 200 or 300. And maybe you spent your whole life saying, God, please deliver your people from the Egyptians. We're enslaved to them. This is terrible. And you know that your parents asked this their entire life, and their grandparents asked for this their entire life, and probably your great-grandparents asked for this. I mean, have you ever prayed for something for a month or a year? It's easy to get discouraged and think God's not going to answer, or God's not listening. I can't imagine generations prayed. And finally, God raised up a deliverer, Moses. And after quite a few, what I might call shenanigans between God talking to Moses and the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he didn't want to let them go, but God finally said, okay, tomorrow you're going to get to go. Because I'm doing all this stuff to help the king of Egypt realize that I'm for real. But said this one's going to do it. And so it got so Pharaoh was so stubborn, he wouldn't let the people go. He said, I'm going to send the angel of death. And he's going to pass over the whole land. And the firstborn of every household is going to die, from the poorest to the richest, from the king to everybody. He said, but if you take a perfect lamb, no blemishes, and you sacrifice it and put the blood on your doorway, that angel of death will pass over your household. And he said, in the morning, Pharaoh's going to be so distraught, he's going to throw you out of here. He's going to be so ready for you to leave. And so the people were told, you got to be in a hurry. Eat the meal with your coat on, because we don't know at what point it's going to happen. We got to be ready to go. And don't worry about when you make bread, which was their staple. Don't worry about putting yeast in it. So that's why unleavened bread is such a big thing. And so this is what happened, and the people escaped. And so for generations up and through the time of Jesus, they would celebrate the Passover. They would have a meal together, remembering what God had done. And Jesus did this every year as a good Jewish man. And this last supper was very different, though. Because in previous years, Jesus was kind of a star, a celebrity. Everybody knew him. This is this guy who heals, right? Did he raise someone from the dead? And he teaches, he loves people. And so Jesus had this popularity, this momentum. Everywhere he went, people wanted to be near him. They loved him. But this last year was different. The momentum had turned around. There were rumors that there were groups of people trying to take Jesus down, to have him arrested and killed. And the disciples knew if Jesus went down, well, they were going down with him. And so this was very troubling. It didn't help that Jesus, right before this, was talking a lot about death. You know, when you're following a leader of a movement, the last thing you want them to be doing is talking about their death. And I'm sure that was troubling to them. Like, oh, Jesus, don't talk about death anymore. We want victory. We want to go forward. Because they're thinking, if you're going forward, if you're moving up, we're moving up with you. If God is with you and working with you, things get better. And that's kind of how we view things, right? If God is working and things are happening, things improve, things get better, momentum increases. It certainly doesn't go the other way. But at the time of the Last Supper, things were not going well. There's all this kind of cryptic stuff about Jesus sends these people to meet with some mysterious person, and they've got a special room for them to meet in. And it's interesting because Jesus doesn't even tell his disciples where this place is. He sends a couple guys in, they prepare the room, but then Jesus meets with his disciples at night, after dark, and takes them there. It's almost like there's this cloak and dagger stuff. There's like everything's on the down low. And it's like Jesus doesn't even trust telling the 12 that they can have this information. And it turns out that's true, because one of them was a traitor, was ready to betray him. And so imagine the mood in the room. Here you are, Jesus has arranged this Passover meal, you're his follower, but you kind of got to sneak in after dark. You didn't tell anyone where you were, because the people are after you. And when you finally get there, it gets even more awkward, because here's what Jesus said. This is from Mark 14. It says, in the evening, Jesus arrived with the 12. So he finally meets up with them. It's dark, it's evening, and they finally get there. It says, as they were at the table eating, Jesus says, I tell you the truth, one of you eating here with me will betray me. I'm like, oh man, that's got to be awkward, right? Here we are with the rabbi, we got the special meal, and he kicks it off. Someone here's a traitor. greatly distressed, and I'm sure they were, each of them asked in turn, am I the one? Is it me? I'm surely not me, right? He replied, it is one of you 12 who is eating from this bowl with me. He's not saying it's somebody out there, it's one of us. It's one of the inner people. It says, for the Son of Man must die. There he goes, talking about death again, right? It says, as the scripture declared long ago. But how terrible it will be for the one who betrays him. It would be far better for that man if he had never been born. So, the momentum has really shifted. You know, it's so ironic. When we today read about the Last Supper, we just think, oh, this was this wonderful time. But I think there was some, I think the disciples are struggling, like, is this over? Jesus is going to be betrayed. He says he's going to die. Did we back the wrong man? I remember when he moved through the crowds and nobody opposed him, and I thought God was in this. I must have been wrong, but and so then Jesus continues. And this next part, verse 22 to 26 of Mark 14, this is like the part we love to hear. This is wonderful to us. I'm sure this was terrible to them. It says, as they were eating, Jesus took some bread and blessed it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to his disciples, saying, take it, for this is my body. And when we hear these words, we think, Jesus saved me. He died so that I could live. These are wonderful news. But as a follower, like, what do you mean this is your body? You talk more about the death. It says, and he took the cup of wine and gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, this is my blood, which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It is poured out as a sacrifice for many. Well, they knew what blood poured out for a sacrifice meant. It meant death again. It says, I tell you the truth, I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it new in the kingdom of God. And then I guess they sang a hymn, and then he went to the Mount of Olives and kind of wrapped it up. They sang and then moved on. So we hear these words 2,000 years later. I love these words. I love reading them. I love when we do communion and we just have this time where we talk to God and say, we eat the bread, the juice, and think, God, Jesus, that represents your body and your blood. You died for me. But for the 12 that night, it was just more negativity, more bad news. Jesus is going to die. Peter can hardly take it anymore. He says, well, if one of these people betrays you, he says, I'll never do it. I'm into the end. We're with you, Jesus. And of course, we know that later on that night, he's kind of watching Jesus being interrogated, and he's kind of watching from the distance, and it's dark. And this young girl says, oh, I can tell by your accent, you're one of that Jesus guy's followers. And Peter's like, no, not me. He denies 3 times he even knows him. So, there have been a lot of things throughout history, and even a lot of things for Jesus' followers that have been hard. And so here we are today, 14 months into this pandemic. And, none of us, I don't think anybody thought it would take this long. And there's still incredible uncertainty. I'm sure your family relationships are strained. There's probably people you haven't seen. I haven't seen my grandkids in almost a year and a half. I'm going to see them in a couple weeks, so I'm very excited. And then some of you are with your family all the time, and that's added strain too, right? So there's all this going on. We don't know if or when kids can safely go back to school. We have all these political, you dare even talk about things going on in the world because of the political divisions. But I want you to know, the problems in our world are nothing new, as Ecclesiastes tells us. They are big problems for us, though. And so the question I want to ask you today, I think it's pretty important, and that is, can you trust God? Can you trust him? Can you maintain your faith in God when there's no evidence that he is active in the world or in your life? I mean, I still think back to the 400 years where those Israelites were praying to be delivered from Egypt. Nothing. Quiet. And so here we are, and if you're like me, you've been praying about this thing all the time. I'll go to have my prayer time, and I have my regular things I pray for, and oftentimes my mind shifts, and I think, God, how do we get out of this? You've got to get us out of this. And then it gets maybe a little better, and then it gets worse, and it just continues on. So can you continue to embrace faith in God and Jesus as your Savior? God is your creator, when you see no evidence of his presence or that he's doing anything in your life, in our culture, or in the country. And I believe very much that our answers to these questions are going to determine our response to this uncertainty, and it's going to shape our future. And so this series, he's still got the whole world in his hand, is one of my attempts through this pandemic to remind us of who God is and that we can put our faith in him. As American Christians, and I don't think it's like this around the world, but I know it's like this for us, we expect answers, we expect responses, we expect progress, we expect things to be fast. And that goes with God too. We expect it in our world, our society, we expect it with God. We equate God with prosperity, forward motion, blessings, right? That's what God does to his people. Forward motion, blessing, prosperity, it's good. And sometimes I think, why shouldn't we? God has made us incredibly prosperous, blessed us in so many ways. Oftentimes my prayer to God is, Lord, you bless me way more than I deserve. I think, how could you bless me so much with freedom, with a wonderful family, with food to eat, shelter, all these things that not everybody in the world has, that we seem to have even more of. But if we look at God, how God has worked with people throughout history, what we see is that whenever there's trouble, God's right there working in the midst of it. Point number 2, the greatest things in life often begin in the biggest messes. The greatest things in life often begin in the biggest messes. And I think of my own life too. This is minor in comparison to the pandemic, but this was a crisis point for me. I've always been a very introverted, shy person who prefers to be in the background. And as a young adult, I sensed God calling me to ministry. And not knowing any better, I just said, yeah, I'll do that. And then I thought, well, I don't know anything about ministry or being a pastor, so I'm going to get some training. So I went to seminary because I'd already finished college at Penn State. And I remember my first preaching class in seminary. And I'd never done it before. There were a lot of guys who had. Some of them were pastoring churches and going to school part-time. They did this every week, or many had experience. I never had done anything, 0. And so we studied the basics. How do you do a message? How do you preach? You have 3 points. And since then I've learned, you can have 2, you can have 4, but 3's okay. They said, do 3, and all you guys have stories to tell. And I quickly learned when I finally got into ministry that I have a great memory and I can tell stories. I can do illustrations that fit. Like, here's something I can do. But at the time, I did this first message, and the professor wanted to help us, so he recorded it. Now, for those of you who are young, you may not know what this is, but we had these video cassette tapes that we put in a VCR and we recorded. This was before digital. And the professor said, I want you to keep this and don't destroy this. You might be tempted to, and you can watch it every once in a while and just see how you improved it on. So I got up to do my thing, and they recorded me on video cassette, and it was really bad. I mean, I was just so nervous. I'd never done it before, and I fumbled through everything. And I remember I'm watching this on video cassette, and if those of you that remember the olden days, you could scan forward. You'd hit fast forward, and it would go in fast motion. So I couldn't take watching myself anymore, so I started scanning forward. And what I saw was I was so nervous that I was shifting back and forth almost like a dance. So I'm watching myself and I go, and I'm just like, it's even worse when it's in fast forward. It was awful. And the really good news about all this is at some point we shifted to digital, and I have no idea where that tape is today. So I'm very excited about that. But it was just bad, and it was a crisis for me. It confirmed to me. I'm like, God, I'm all in on this thing. I moved my wife Karen. We left our jobs in Pennsylvania. I was making donuts here in town. We sold most of our stuff. And I moved to this furnished apartment, and I started over, and now I stink at this. And I'm like, this is terrible. And it created a major crisis for me. And, that is pretty small compared to what I'm thinking the disciples were feeling at that Last Supper. I'm thinking, man, this Rabbi Jesus, we thought he was the one. We thought he was the Messiah. Now he's talking about dying. And we have to sneak into this upper room at night so that they don't arrest him. But that was kind of one of the major moments in my life. It was a crisis. And I thought to myself, and I'll be honest, it would have been really hard for me to quit, move out of there, and get out of there. If it had been easy, I'll be honest with you, I might have done it. But it would have just disrupted everything. I'm like, well, I'm going to at least see this semester through and see where it goes. But the pandemic feels a lot like that. It feels like I'm just trying to do the right thing, and this isn't working. We hate it. It's ruined our lives. At least it feels like that. It seems like it wrecks everything you love, right? What are the things you love to do? The pandemic wrecked all of them, right? And we don't seem to be able to end it. So, but remember, right? Some of the greatest things in life often begin in the biggest messes. That's how God works. He's still got the whole world in his hand. And so point 3, God is working in our world even when we don't see any evidence. So it might look like God's not doing anything. It looked like God wasn't doing anything for 400 years in Egypt. But he was getting ready. He was working. When God does some of his greatest work during times when it seems like he's doing the least. We see this in the Bible. We've all seen it in our own history. For me, my terrible first experience at preaching turned out to be a blessing. I very quickly realized if I even want to have a shot at this, I have to completely rely on God. Like let's say I'd been really good. I'm like, oh, this is easy. I can talk to people. I'd have been like, I can just do this. So I'll just go up and talk to people. But now me, I was like, God, I'm going to do this message thing that I'm not very good at. I'm starting out as a young preacher. I'm like, I need your spirit. I need you to help me with this. I need you to help me as I read the word and I put it together so that it can be something significant. And to this day, I know that what's going to make a message I do good or bad is how much I'm following God and how much he's working. That's what it's all about. I learned that God has a plan and nothing can stop it, not even all of my insecurities or poor execution or failures. It's the same for you. None of your insecurities, none of your failures can stop God's plan from working in your life. It just doesn't happen that way. Because God works in the biggest message. God does some of his best stuff when it seems like he's not doing anything. And so thankfully, I learned to overcome my nervousness. It was kind of humbling, and I'm not. I don't know if you can talk about being humble and still be humble, but I've had people say to me, well, you seem really humble, Dave. And I say, well, I got a lot of reasons to be, right? That's why, I know it's God working. And so God helped me to overcome my nervousness, to trust in him. But it was for sure a very serious faith crisis for me at the time. But the reality is that God moves in his own way, in his own timing. For him, 400 years of the nation of Israel being enslaved in Egypt wasn't late. For everyone else, it was late. For God, 14 months of a pandemic with COVID-19 was not too long. He's working, he's doing things. And the final point that I want to share today might seem like the silliest, but to me, this is the key to the whole thing. It's just that sometimes it takes him a while, right? When God is working, sometimes it takes him a while. We got to be patient. We got to trust him. And I just want to remind you, he's still got the whole world in his hands, including your life. And so that's the opening message of this. And I want to go to next steps. Like the last series we did was very practical, and I challenged you in so many ways. This is a faith series. This is about, will we walk by faith? Can we walk by faith? And how do we do that better? So I want to challenge you with some next steps. They're on the back of the Connect cards, back of the message notes. First is, I'm going to put my faith in God and surrender my fears to him, knowing I can trust God with my future. And this is kind of just, all right, God, I can't see where things are going. There's a lot of uncertainty. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to put my faith in you and know that wherever my future's going, you'll be with me. And I believe that is kind of almost a daily thing we have to do as people of faith. So I'm challenging you to continue that today. Second is I'm going to pray and ask God to increase my faith. I want to trust God in all things, especially during this time. And maybe these hard times are an opportunity for your faith to increase. To say, God, I don't see it. It looks like you're not doing anything, or you're definitely not doing what I want you to do. Things are not getting better. The blessings aren't coming. In fact, we're going down. But this pandemic has strained us all. Let's be faithful. That's one thing we can do, right? We can trust God, say, God, increase my faith. Help me, regardless of what I see, to trust you. And this next one is I'm going to commit to trust in God for my life, even when I see no evidence that he's doing anything. And I know that's probably one of the hardest ones, because we're used to praying, and then things get better. Or we get a no, we move in another direction. But we're not supposed to be moving in another direction. So I'm gonna walk by faith, not by sight. It doesn't matter what goes on. I want to trust God. And then the last one, I just encourage you to attend the rest of the series, 2 more weeks, in person or online. Again, this series is not going to be, I'm going to challenge you to do some hard thing. This is a faith thing. This is looking inside. How can I have faith in God, increase my faith, trust him? And that's kind of where we're going with this. So, and my prayer is that God will help me and he'll help you. That when we come out the other side, whenever this pandemic is over, I hope it's over next month or this summer, but I don't know. But when it's over, I don't want to look back and say, I was so down, angry, upset, that I just acted terrible. I just withdrew into myself, or I let the anger take me. I want to look back and say, in the midst of these hard times, I put my faith and trust in the Lord. And that's my prayer for all of us. So I just want to pray for you as you take those next steps. Heavenly Father, we look to you now, and we thank you for this lesson from history. Nothing's new for you. It's new for us, but we know, Lord, that you're with us every step of the way. Help us, Lord, to take this troubling, hard time that are truly hard and make them a faith-building time. Lord, show us how to do that. Help us to walk day by day, putting our faith and trust in you, knowing that you still have the whole world in your hands. We give you thanks and praise for that.